Now let's begin with our next unit, which is Unit 4, From Confederation to Constitution, or if I may quote George Washington, "We're united and it feels so good." Well, at least that's the way George would have done it if he could have, so let's continue here. So, Lesson 11 is our first one of Unit 4, and it's entitled The Articles of Confederation. So our TEEKs, we can put events from 1776 to 1787 in chronological order, that we can explain the details surrounding the writing of the Articles of Confederation, and that we can explain how the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 set an example for new states. So July 4th, 1776, Independence Day, the day that the United States declared its independence from Great Britain. So, as we see later King George, let's bring on our Karate Kid. Watch him do his kick. Hi-ya! And there goes George. But now that Britain is no longer our ruler, what kind of government would the new country have? So the Continental Congress agreed that the United States would be a republic, which means a government of elected representatives. And as we've seen when we studied Unit 2 about the colonization of the Americas, that the colonies had a long tradition of representative and elective government. But they disagreed on other issues. They wrote the Articles of Confederation to establish a national government. And in doing so, they deliberately created a weak government that left most powers in the hands of the states. Because having just left Great Britain and King George, the last thing they wanted to do was establish another government that they would see as another tyrannical government. This new government consisted of the Confederation Congress. There was no executive branch and no judicial branches, so no president and no courts. And each state had one vote. No difference for greater populations, so a state like Rhode Island that had a very small population was equal to Virginia, which had a much larger one. So let's look at the powers of the Confederation government. Its national powers was that they could wage war, and of course we see this in that they fought the American Revolution. They could make peace, and we see this in signing the Treaty of Paris to end the Revolutionary War. They could make treaties just as they did with France and Spain during the war. And they could issue money. But so could the states. So could you see problems with that in the future with national money and state money? So let's look at the states' powers. First of all, the power to set taxes, and that's a critical one for any government to be successful to generate revenue. The states had the power to create courts, which means to settle disputes, that they could enforce laws, establish trade with even other countries, and issue money just like the national government. So essentially you have the states almost acting like 13 little mini countries under the umbrella of the Confederation. However, the Articles were passed in 1777 by Continental Congress and then sent out to the states to ratify. Now, 5 of the smaller states objected to the bigger states controlling western lands, and we see here, for example, that Virginia and North Carolina and Georgia had significant lands out to the Mississippi River, whereas the smaller states, did not have those. So they objected to that. So in 1781, the larger states agreed to give up control of those lands to Congress, and with this, all 13 states ratified the Articles. Now, the Articles of Confederation was really not so much of a constitution so much as a loose treaty or agreement of friendship between the states. But at least now the U.S. did have a government. And one of the first issues that government would deal with was the selling of the Northwest Territory. And the Northwest Territory was their western territory that was outlined by the Great Lakes to the north and the Ohio and Mississippi rivers. So it sort of forms a rough triangle here in the northern area. And the first thing they passed was the Land Ordinance of 1785. And what this did was it took this huge territory and divided it up into 36-mile square pieces called townships. And here you see an example of the grid of a township. Again, 6 miles by 6 miles. Each single mile, square mile is numbered and gridded. And usually within a township, square number 16, which you see right here, would be reserved for a future public school. And the next thing we get is the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, also dealing with the same area. And this is a 3-step plan to add new states to the Northwest Territory. So the founders are thinking ahead and realizing that we're not just going to stop with the original 13 states, that as we expand, we should also add new states. So our plan to do this is first, A new territory is given a territorial governor and several judges. When the population of that state reaches 5,000 free white male landowners, so again, there's our RWDs, they have to be landowners, then those people can elect an assembly to govern them as a territory. And finally, when they reach a total population of 60,000, that they can apply to become a state. The Northwest Territory also established the rights of settlers in territories, and it banned slavery in the Northwest Territory. But what makes the Northwest Ordinance so important is that it establishes an orderly process for admitting new states to the United States, and that these new states would come in with the same rights as the original 13, that we would not have the original states and sort of like junior states, but that all states, new and old, would be equal. So our Lesson 11 thoughts. Why did the U.S. choose a loose confederation of states over a stronger national government after declaring its independence from Britain? Number 2, what issues or conflicts do you predict the new nation might have under the Articles of Confederation? And finally, number 3, what do the Land Ordinance of 1785 and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 show us about the leaders of this time? So think about those questions and answer them in your notes, and then we'll move on with Lesson 12, which is Problems with the Articles.